the secret mission that rewrote America's World War II strategy. August 29, 1940. Dawn breaks over a Britain under siege. Above Liverpool's docks, the sky churns with smoke and the echo of German Luftwaffe engines. The Battle of Britain rages at its most desperate hour. France has fallen. The Low Countries have crumbled. Britain stands alone against the Nazi war machine. On this morning, while fighter pilots scramble into Spitfires and Hercules to defend their homeland, a small group of men boards an ocean liner. They're not fleeing, they're not evacuating. They're embarking on what might be the most important voyage of World War II. In their possession, a small metal box. Inside that box, Britain's most precious military secrets. This is the story of the Tizard Mission, a desperate gamble, a breathtaking act of trust, and the secret operation that would change the course of the war, reshape America's military strategy, and forge an alliance that would help save the world from tyranny. Welcome to Archive-Bound, and today we're going to uncover one of World War II's most remarkable untold stories. To understand this mission, we need to go back to June 1940. Winston Churchill stands before Parliament, his voice steady despite the catastrophe unfolding across the English Channel. France had surrendered just days before. The British Expeditionary Force barely escaped annihilation at Dunkirk. Now, Hitler's Wehrmacht controlled the entire European coastline from Norway to Spain. And across the narrow waters of the English Channel, just 21 miles at its closest point, German forces massed for invasion. Operation Sea Lion. That was Hitler's code name for the invasion of Britain. But first, the Luftwaffe had to achieve air superiority. On July 10, 1940, the Battle of Britain began in earnest. German bombers came in waves, hundreds of aircraft at a time. They targeted shipping convoys, then radar stations, then the airfields themselves. RAF pilots, outnumbered and exhausted, flew sortie after sortie, sometimes 4, 5, 6 missions a day. Boys barely out of their teens, climbing into their Spitfires, knowing the odds were against them ever coming back. By late August, the situation had become critical. RAF Fighter Command was on the verge of collapse. Airfields were cratered, planes were destroyed on the ground. Experienced pilots were dying faster than they could be replaced. On August 31st, Fighter Command suffered its worst single day of losses. Keith Park, the commander of No. 11 Group defending Southeast England, would later write, "The damage to our forward aerodromes and sector stations was having a serious effect on the fighting efficiency of the squadrons."
Britain was losing, and everyone knew it. In Washington, President Franklin Roosevelt watched with growing alarm. If Britain fell, Nazi Germany would control all of Europe. The prospect of invading occupied Europe would face, as one historian put it, nearly impossible odds. But America wasn't ready to fight, not yet. The country was gripped by powerful isolationist sentiment. The memories of World War I, the trenches, the gas, the senseless slaughter were still fresh. Congress had passed strict neutrality acts preventing American companies from selling weapons to nations at war. "Let's stay out of Europe's war," the America First Committee proclaimed. Charles Lindbergh, the famous aviator, spoke to massive rallies arguing that the Atlantic Ocean made America invulnerable. Why should American boys die in another European conflict? Roosevelt disagreed. He believed deeply that if Britain fell, America would face Hitler's Reich alone. But his hands were tied. He couldn't send troops. He couldn't openly ship weapons. And the 1940 presidential election was just months away. Time was running out. For Britain, for democracy, for the world. And then the halls of British power, a radical idea began to take shape. His name was Sir Henry Tizard, chairman of Britain's Aeronautical Research Committee. A scientist, yes, but more than that, a visionary who understood that this war wouldn't be won by bravery alone. It would be won by technology. Tizard had been instrumental in Britain's development of radar in the 1930s.
That early warning system was the only reason the RAF could intercept German bombers before they reached their targets. Without radar, Britain would have been blind. Without radar, the country would have already fallen. But now, Tizard had something even more revolutionary, something that could change everything. Birmingham University, February 1940. Two physicists, John Randall and Harry Boot, were working in near total secrecy. They were trying to solve a problem that had stumped scientists around the world: how to generate powerful radio waves at microwave frequencies. Why did this matter? Because microwave radar could do things that long-wave radar couldn't. It could be small enough to fit in an aircraft, precise enough to detect a surfaced submarine from miles away, powerful enough to see through clouds and darkness. The device they invented was called the cavity magnetron. It was roughly the size of a hockey puck, and it could generate 10 kilowatts of power at 10-centimeter wavelengths, 1,000 times more powerful than anything the Americans or Germans had developed. Let me put that in perspective. Before the cavity magnetron, practical radar required room-sized equipment. The transmitters were massive. The power output was limited. Putting radar in an aircraft was nearly impossible. The cavity magnetron changed all that. Suddenly, you could have airborne radar, shipboard radar precise enough to target enemy vessels at night, ground-based radar that could map terrain through any weather. James Finney Baxter, the official historian of the Office of Scientific Research and Development, would later write, "When the members of the Tizard Mission brought the cavity magnetron to America in 1940, they carried the most valuable cargo ever brought to our shores." But here's the thing. Britain couldn't exploit this technology, not alone. The country's factories were stretched to the breaking point just producing Spitfires and ammunition. There was no industrial capacity to mass-produce these complex devices, no time to set up new production lines, and German bombs were destroying what infrastructure remained. So Tizard proposed something audacious, something that made Churchill's military advisors recoil in horror. Give it away. Give the cavity magnetron and Britain's other most sensitive military secrets to the Americans for free, no strings attached, in exchange for one thing: mass production and America's industrial might. Churchill's staff was far from keen on this idea. Give away Britain's most prized technological advantages to a neutral country? What if America stayed out of the war? What if the secrets fell into German hands? Robert Watson Watt, the pioneer of British radar, opposed the plan. So did many in the military establishment. The risks seemed enormous. But Churchill himself understood the calculus. Britain was losing. Every day, the noose tightened. If something didn't change, and change soon, there would be no Britain left to defend. On August 26, 1940, Churchill gave his approval. The mission would proceed. Tizard assembled his team carefully: civilian scientists, military experts, each one among the finest minds in Britain. Together, they began gathering documents, blueprints, technical specifications, research data on jet engines, including Frank Whittle's revolutionary design, early atomic research, proximity fuses, anti-submarine warfare techniques, chemical weapons defenses, and, of course, the cavity magnetron itself. All of it went into a small black metal box, a deed box actually, the kind solicitors used for storing property documents. But this one had a special modification. It was designed to sink if the ship went down. The secrets would go to the bottom of the Atlantic rather than fall into enemy hands. On August 29, 1940, the team boarded their ship in Liverpool. The vessel, the Duchess of Richmond, a Canadian Pacific Ocean liner converted for wartime service. Edward George Bowen, a Welsh physicist and radar pioneer, carried the deed box. That night, he slept with it under his hotel bed. The next morning, when a too-eager railway porter grabbed it at the station, Bowen nearly had a heart attack chasing it down. The box contained what would become known as Magnetron number 12. The 12th prototype manufactured by General Electric Company at Wembley.
8 cavities instead of 6. Small enough to hold in your hand, powerful enough to change the war. As the Duchess of Richmond pulled away from Liverpool's docks, the men on deck watched Britain recede into the distance. Smoke rose from damaged buildings. Fighter contrails streaked the sky where the Battle of Britain continued its deadly dance. None of them knew if they'd see their homeland again, or if there would even be a homeland to return to. The voyage across the Atlantic took 9 days. 9 days of constant gnawing fear. German U-boats prowled the shipping lanes in wolf packs. Unrestricted submarine warfare, they called it. The Germans had already sunk hundreds of Allied vessels. Thousands of sailors and passengers had gone down with their ships, swallowed by the cold Atlantic waters. The Tizard Mission carried the most valuable cargo ever transported across that ocean. If a U-boat torpedo found the Duchess of Richmond, the war might be lost right there. The team had prepared for this possibility. The deed box was designed to sink, but there were no copies of many of these documents. Some of the research was one of a kind. If the ship went down, years of scientific work would be lost forever. The men took turns standing watch over the box. They kept it locked in the most secure part of the ship. And they waited, watched the horizon, listened for the sound of alarms that would mean a U-boat had been spotted. But they made it. On September 6, 1940, the Duchess of Richmond arrived safely in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Bowen and John Cockcroft, another team member, went immediately to Ottawa to meet with Canadian officials. The rest proceeded to Washington, arriving on September 11th. Tizard himself had flown ahead to make preliminary arrangements. He'd met with Vannevar Bush, the chairman of America's National Defense Research Committee, essentially Roosevelt's science advisor. Bush was intrigued, but cautious. America was still officially neutral. The team set up headquarters at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, not far from the British Embassy. It operated much like a regular office: secretaries, office hours, daily briefings. Which seems bizarre for a top-secret mission, doesn't it? But that was partly the genius of it: hide in plain sight. The critical moment came on September 19, 1940. The Wardman Park Hotel, Washington, D.C. Tizard's team met with Dr. Alfred Loomis and other members of the National Defense Research Committee. The Americans explained their own microwave research. They'd been working on shortwave radar, they said, 10-centimeter wavelength. But they'd hit a dead end. Their klystron tubes could only produce about 10 watts of power, not nearly enough for practical applications. The British listened politely. Then Edward Bowen reached into his briefcase. Out came Magnetron number 12. Bowen placed it on the table. This small device, he explained quietly, could produce 10 kilowatts of power at 10 centimeters. 10 kilowatts, 1,000 times more powerful than what the Americans had achieved. The room fell silent. Admiral Harold Bowen, head of the U.S. Navy's research effort, later recalled that moment. The American scientists were, he said, shaken by what they were seeing. This wasn't just an incremental improvement. This was a revolution. One American scientist actually insisted on X-raying the device because he couldn't believe it was real. When the X-ray showed 8 cavities instead of the 6 shown in the preliminary drawings, there was momentary confusion. Bowen had to cable back to Britain to confirm that yes, the 12th prototype had been made with 8 cavities. They'd been experimenting with different configurations. The Americans chose to copy exactly what they'd been given: 8 cavities. Every American magnetron produced thereafter would follow that design. The ice was broken. Any lingering American skepticism evaporated in that moment. If the British were willing to share this, their most advanced technology, then this was serious. This wasn't a trade negotiation. This was an act of desperation and trust. Over the following weeks, the Tizard team crisscrossed America: Washington to New York, New Jersey to Boston, California and back, meeting with scientists, engineers, and industrialists, sharing blueprints, demonstrating technologies. They revealed the Whittle jet engine designs,
They discussed atomic research with Enrico Fermi at Columbia University. They shared advances in anti-aircraft systems, navigation aids, and submarine detection. And everywhere they went, they emphasized one thing: speed. Time was running out. Britain needed these technologies in production now. The American response was swift and stunning. Bell Telephone Laboratories was given the contract to produce cavity magnetrons. Their scientists and engineers worked around the clock. By October 1940, just 1 month after seeing the British prototype, Bell produced the first 30 American-made magnetrons. Think about that timeline. 1 month from never having seen the technology to producing working units. That's the power of American industrial capacity. By the end of the war, American factories had produced over 1 million cavity magnetrons. But the magnetron was just the beginning. The Tizard mission catalyzed something much larger. In October 1940, with initial funding from Alfred Loomis and support from the National Defense Research Committee, MIT opened the Radiation Laboratory. They used the deliberately vague term radiation as cover for their real work, radar development.
At its peak, the Rad Lab employed nearly 4,000 people, scientists from academia, engineers from industry, military personnel, government officials, all working together in an unprecedented collaboration. The technologies that emerged from that laboratory would help turn the tide of the war. Airborne intercept radar allowed British night fighters to find and destroy German bombers in the darkness. Before this technology, shooting down a bomber at night was nearly impossible. After, the kill rate skyrocketed. The Blitz, devastating as it was, would have been far worse without airborne radar. Naval surface search radar transformed the Battle of the Atlantic. German U-boats had been sinking Allied shipping with devastating effectiveness. They'd attack on the surface at night when they were nearly impossible to spot. But with microwave radar, Allied ships and aircraft could detect surface submarines from miles away. The hunters became the hunted. Ship-to-ship fire control radar allowed naval guns to hit targets beyond visual range, in darkness or through storms. At the Battle of the Sulu Sea in 1944, American ships used radar-directed gunfire to devastating effect. The H-2S bombing radar, operating at S-band around 3 GHz, allowed RAS bombers to navigate and bomb through clouds. No more relying on clear skies and visual bombing. Targets that had been safe behind cloud cover were now vulnerable. And then there was the proximity fuse. This ingenious device used a miniature radar to detect when an anti-aircraft shell was near its target. Instead of requiring a direct hit, the shell would explode at the optimal moment. The impact was staggering. When married to radar-directed anti-aircraft guns, the proximity fuse dramatically increased the effectiveness of air defenses. This combination played a crucial role in defending Britain against V-1 flying bombs in 1944. Missiles that had terrorized London were now being shot down before reaching their targets. In the Pacific, proximity fuses helped protect American ships from Japanese kamikaze attacks. The suicide planes that had wreaked such havoc early in the campaign found themselves facing a wall of radar-directed proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. The cavity magnetron also enabled LORAN, long-range navigation. When British scientist Edward Bowen demonstrated the British G-hyperbolic navigation system, Alfred Loomis immediately saw its potential. He developed a much longer-range version that allowed ships and aircraft to determine their position with unprecedented accuracy, even over vast distances. This might not sound as dramatic as shooting down bombers or detecting submarines, but navigation was critical. Allied bombers could now find their targets. Supply convoys could navigate through storms and darkness. Amphibious invasions could be coordinated with precision. All of this, every bit of it, traced back to that metal deed box carried across the Atlantic in September 1940. The Tizard mission also opened channels of communication for jet engine development. The British Whittle engine design became the foundation for American jet propulsion research. General Electric took the lead, developing what would become the GEIA and subsequent production engines. When World War II ended, the Germans were ahead in jet technology.
But the groundwork laid by the Tizard mission meant the Allies were only months behind, not years. By the late 1940s, American and British jet fighters would dominate the skies.
And the atomic bomb? The Manhattan Project benefited from the scientific connections established by the Tizard mission. British atomic research, shared during those meetings in 1940, contributed to the Allied nuclear weapons program. Scientists from both nations worked side by side at Los Alamos. But here's something that often gets overlooked. The Tizard mission didn't just change the war, it changed America itself. Before 1940, American military research was fragmented. The Army had its labs, the Navy had its facilities. Universities worked independently. There was little coordination, little sharing of information. The Tizard mission and the MIT Radiation Laboratory established a new model: government funding, academic research, industrial production, military application, all working together seamlessly. This became the template for American research and development. The Manhattan Project followed this model. The Cold War military-industrial complex grew from these roots. NASA, DARPA, the entire post-war American technological dominance, you can trace significant elements of it back to the collaboration sparked by that desperate British mission in 1940. The Tizard team returned to Britain in November 1940. They'd been gone less than 3 months. But in that short time, they'd accomplished something remarkable. Britain got what it desperately needed: mass production of war-winning technologies. American factories began churning out magnetrons, radar systems, and countless other devices that British industry simply couldn't produce in sufficient quantities. America got something too. Not just technology, though that was valuable beyond measure. America got a crash course in advanced military research from a nation that had been fighting for its survival. The knowledge transfer was immense. But more than that, the Tizard mission established trust. Real trust, forged in the crucible of existential crisis. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, America entered the war not as a novice scrambling to catch up, but as a nation already mobilized, already researching, already producing advanced military technology. The Lend-Lease program, which had begun earlier in 1941, expanded dramatically. American weapons, food, and supplies flowed to Britain and the Soviet Union. But it wasn't just material aid. It was technological partnership. British and American scientists continued working together throughout the war. The special relationship, that term Churchill would later use to describe the Anglo-American alliance, had its foundations in the desperate gamble of the Tizard mission in 1940. After the war, Sir Henry Tizard didn't receive the public recognition he deserved. He wasn't Churchill, he didn't lead armies or fly combat missions. He was a civil servant, a scientist, a behind-the-scenes operator. But John Holdren, who would later become President Obama's science advisor, said this about the Tizard mission: "The cavity magnetron allowed the miniaturization of radar, tipping the balance against U-boats in the Battle of the Atlantic. It led to the proximity fuse, dramatically reducing the threat posed by Japanese planes to Allied ships in the Pacific." Anyone who has studied the Second World War understands the Allied edge many of these technologies played in the outcome. The outcome. Not just a battle, not just a campaign, the outcome of the entire war. Today, the technology given away so freely by the Tizard mission shapes our daily lives in ways we rarely consider. That microwave oven in your kitchen? Its heart is a cavity magnetron, a direct descendant of the device John Randall and Harry Boot invented in 1940. GPS navigation? Built on the foundation of LORAN and radar technology. Air traffic control, weather radar, medical imaging, all trace their lineage to the technology shared in that desperate autumn of 1940. And the model of government-funded, university-conducted, industry-applied research? That became the American standard. The National Science Foundation, research grants, technology transfer.
The entire ecosystem of innovation that has made America a technological superpower, its blueprint was sketched during those meetings in Washington, New York, and Boston in the fall of 1940. The Battle of Britain reached its climax on September 15, 1940. Massive German bomber formations attacked London in what the Luftwaffe hoped would be a knockout blow. But RAF Fighter Command, given just enough breathing room by Hitler's shift from targeting airfields to bombing cities, rose to meet them. The Germans suffered devastating losses. 2 days later, Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. Britain would not be invaded. The RAF had won. But victory wasn't assured by bravery alone. The technologies developed with American help, the radar systems, the radio navigation aids, the coordination systems, all played their part. And in the years to come, as the war expanded to every corner of the globe, those technologies would prove decisive again and again. In November 2015, 75 years after the Tizard Mission, the embassies of the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States held a symposium in Washington to commemorate that remarkable collaboration. Defense officials from all three nations attended. Michael Fallon, Britain's Secretary of State for Defense, said, "Tizard's mission was a desperate act of trust that sowed the seeds for future victory and collaboration." A desperate act of trust, that's what it was. Britain, with its back against the wall, gambled everything on American industrial might and goodwill. America, still officially neutral, chose to help a nation fighting for its survival. That gamble paid off. For Britain, for America, for the world. The metal deed box that traveled under Edward Bowen's hotel bed, that nearly got lost at a railway station, that crossed the U-boat-infested Atlantic in September 1940, that box contained more than technology. It contained hope. It contained trust. It contained the seeds of Allied victory. When historians write about the turning points of World War II, they usually mention
the
Pearl
most
Harbor,
valuable
D-Day,
cargo ever
Stalingrad,
brought to
Midway.
American shores.
Those were the
secret
dramatic
mission
battles that everyone
rewrote
remembers.
America's World
But
War
before
II
any
strategy
of those could happen,
and
there was
helped
the
save
Tizard
the
Mission.
world.
A small
Thanks for
group
watching.
of British
If
scientists
you enjoyed this
traveling
incredible
in secret,
true story,
carrying a
please
briefcase
hit that
full of
like button
blueprints
and
and a
subscribe to our
hockey
channel
puck-sized
for more
device that would
untold
change
stories from
everything.
history.